Okay, well, it looks like it's about time. Welcome everyone to the webinar. Excuse me. This is being hosted by ng-conf, so we will be following the ng-conf code of conduct, and a link to that can be found in the chat. Sorry, my throat's doing some weird stuff. Okay, well, let's get started. Welcome to our webinar, Managing Monorepos with NX. This webinar is going to focus on kind of the steps that you need to take after you've gotten your code into a monorepo. There's a lot of resources out there that will help you get your code into a monorepo. NX provides like a single command you can run to get your code running in the monorepo. And there's a lot of good resources to see like how all the tooling works and like once the monorepo is mature, what you can do with it. But there's not a lot of information on between getting your code into the monorepo and then having a mature monorepo. So that's where we're going to be focusing, kind of like your code's in a monorepo. What are your next steps? So yeah, I'm Michael Madsen. I'm an architect here at Cisco. I've been using NX for close to 6 years now, I think, almost since it released in the first place. Saumya, you can introduce yourself.
So hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Saumya, and I'm a software engineer here in Cisco. I joined Cisco around 1.5 years ago, and Cisco introduced me to the concept of monorepos and NX, and I'm loving it from that day when I start using it. So yeah, let's talk about NX. Yeah. So agenda for today is that we will be looking into the advantages of NX. We will be talking about what is the main challenge which everyone faces when we are using NX, and also how to the implementation and steps for using NX in a monorepo to create a healthy monorepo. We will be looking at some examples, and at the end, we will be opening ourselves for the Q&A sessions. So first, let's, before I start talking about the advantages of NX, I quickly want to cover what a monorepo is. So a monorepo is a single Git repository which has multiple projects, multiple libraries into one repository and the tooling for them. What NX does is NX provides the tool to avail the benefits of a monorepo without the overhead of unmanaged code in a single location. So let's see from the numerous advantages of NX. We have listed out some of the important ones here. So the first one is NX gives us standardized libraries, which means that in our monorepo, we can have multiple front ends, but they can all use the same version of the technology and the languages that we are using and the tools that we are using. For example, we can have the same version across our applications and libraries of Angular, React, Cypress, Jest, and the tools. All our UI can use the same storybook, so which is amazing experience for the developers. Another one is code sharing. So code sharing is very, very easy when we are working in a monorepo. But it's very important that there should be some set of rules, and it should be always a controlled code sharing. And NX give us the tools to set those rules and define what libraries can depend on which ones. And we will be talking about that later in our presentation today. Another one is setting code standards. So using NX, we can set our code standards throughout the application. We can set coding standards for the entire application, multiple applications, different libraries for a specific library, and NX provides us those tools for doing that. And one of the most important ones, and which I really like, is standardized deployments. That's one of the greatest advantage of NX is that, since the code is in one monorepo, we have only one pipeline to maintain, which gives us less overhead. And also, NX gives us the feature of affected files and libraries. What that means is that if we are making a change, NX can only check the libraries and the apps which are affected by our change. It can run the testing, linting, everything on those affected libraries and make sure that our code is safe to deploy, and it also saves us time. We don't have to run everything throughout the application and in all the applications. We can only run all those CI/CD pipelines on our affected applications, which is amazing. Another big advantage of NX is versioning. So before NX, when organizations used to have lots of different repositories and they were sharing code among the repositories, so there could be times that some of the projects will be using different versions of the applications and libraries, right? And they don't always get the time to update it. So there could be libraries which will be using deprecated functions. The UI will not be consistent because it might not be the latest one. So with NX, all the applications and all the libraries, they use the same version, the latest version of the libraries. And the moment you change them, make a change in the library, it is reflected and you can adjust it in all other applications using it. And all the applications, with every merge to the master, your version is updated for the library. So that's the best advantage of NX. And because of these consistent tooling, consistent generators, consistent commands that NX offers us, the development experience has been increased significantly. So it has made the developer's life really, really easy. So these are like some of the really, really helpful and beneficial advantages of NX. But with many advantages, NX also has some implementation challenge. So Michael is going to tell us about those challenges. Over to you, Michael.
All right. So a lot of the challenges come down to how we use the monorepo. So there's a lot of power with the monorepo, but that means that we need to set things up properly so that things work smoothly. So something that people get caught up with a lot is a poor library strategy. So we can make libraries in the monorepo. We can have any number of libraries, but if they are not set up properly, it can cause us a lot of headaches. Some of the ways that can happen is with circular dependencies. So you can get caught up in this. It's easy to do this as you're breaking apart an app. So let's say you have an app that was made into a monorepo. Now you're trying to break that app apart into libraries. It's very easy to get circular dependencies because all that code used to live together, and there wasn't any constraints on like how it used other parts of the code. So as you pull it apart, you'll often end up with code that refers to, like this code refers to this library, and the code in this library refers back to the first library. So that can be a challenge, getting that all handled. Another challenge is a lack of libraries. So again, especially when you're just getting into a monorepo, your project is just an app. There's no libraries, and a lot of the tooling in NX that makes our lives easier is dependent on having your libraries broken out and appropriately scoped. And that leads into the poor scoping. So if your libraries aren't properly scoped, you will run into problems with circular dependencies and other things. So these are things that we're going to help walk you through, like how to break apart your libraries, what's a good library strategy, how do you scope those libraries, and how do you detect and take care of circular dependencies. So how are we going to do it? First step. So again, we're trying to get from, you have your code in a monorepo, and now you need to mature that monorepo. So the first step you want to take is to set standards for new code. And so this concept is kind of it's kind of the same idea as like stopping the bleeding. So oftentimes you've restructured this project. Now you want to start enforcing some new standards. Well, a lot of the old code won't be meeting those standards, but it's hard to find the time or find the buy-in to go back and refactor all of your code to meet these new standards. So what do you do instead? You make it so that those standards are followed going forward, and kind of do this in a gradual way. So ways you can do that: first, establish your lint rules. Lint rules will help make sure that your code all looks the same, follows the same structures, follows the same rules. And with those lint rules, you can implement the linting so that you only lint files that have changed. So let's say you've made a new library, all those new files, they're going to be linted. And you can make it so that if anyone touches an old file, it will also be linted, which means, yeah, someone touching some older code or code that was moved into the monorepo, they will have to do some work to update that file, but you don't have to update the entire project. And that's a pretty big distinction and helps a lot in this transition. Just make sure the new standards you want are being followed, and then address them as you can when you touch those older files. Kind of a similar concept is testing files that changed. So just like with linting only files that we've touched, only test files that you've touched, or this also applies to any new files. So you can say, hey, we want this level of test coverage, and it doesn't really matter that the app that you created the monorepo around has that coverage. It can have lower coverage, but as you write new code and as you modify the existing code, you will be bringing all that code up to the standard that you want. Next, use prettier. A lot of people already use prettier. Use it here too. You only need one config file. It applies to everything, and just do it. It's good. And then finally, use generators. Generators, you might also know them as schematics. That's what Angular calls them. So whenever you do like ng generate component or module or any of those are schematics. NX has a lot of extra schematics. I'll start calling them generators because that's the term they use. So NX has a lot of extra generators, and you can write your own generators if you have those needs. Right now, we'll cover it a little bit more later, but right now, just know there's extra generators there to help you as you start using the monorepo more.
Yeah, and so step 2 for implementing NX in your monorepo, and this is the most important step, is how do you break down your libraries? How do you break down your apps into libraries? So there can be different categories of libraries that you can use to break down your applications. But we will be covering the four most important ones, and it is also recommended to keep the categories into lesser number so that your code makes sense and it's more manageable and organized. So let's go through them one by one. So one of the libraries is a feature library. So what is a feature library? Basically, any UI component, which is smart component, which interacts with the data access, which has its own validation code, UI logic, all that component can go into a feature library or a route. So for example, if your app has a routable, the routable component of your app should go into your feature library. So any smart components which can be a route or dependent on some on data access source, they should go under a feature library. And also feature library can depend upon any of the libraries. They can be dependent on UIs, they can use data access, they can use the util libraries. Now the next one is UI library. So UI library, it's different from the feature library in a sense that UI library only has the presentational components. They are the pure components. They don't have any connection to the data access layer. Any data that the components need in the UI library, that should be coming from the inputs of the component. So all the pure components, all the presentational components, they should totally go into the UI library. UI library can depend on another UI library, or they can depend on the util library. The third one is data access libraries. So data access libraries are basically the libraries which interact with the backend, right? Which interact with fetching the data from the backend. So all of your state management files can go here. If you're not using state management, if you're using services, all the services related files should go here. Anything which is dealing with the data from the backend, all those files should be going to the data access libraries. Also, data access libraries can only be dependent on other data access libraries or util libraries. They cannot they should not be referencing UI and feature libraries. Now, the last, but not the least one is util libraries. So util libraries is like, the low-level code where you can have all those utilities, your pure functions, global styles, anything that is used across the application, which is not very much business case specific. Nothing which is business case specific, only pure functions, any util which can be used across multiple applications across the monorepo. So that can go under the util library. So we have an example to show you how to categorize categorize the library. So let's go and see that example. I have used here the NX example and tweaked it a little bit to categorize different types of libraries. So first, before starting to dig deep into the code, I'll show you what the application is. So basically, the application is that the monorepo has two applications. One is products. Product has list of a front page, which has list of products in it. And then when we click on any of the products, we have the product details page. So we go back, this is the front page. So this is one of the applications that we have. Another application that we have is cart. So if we go and see the cart, it has the header, but nothing just really inside it. But one thing to consider is that the header is shared between cart as well as products application. So going back to the code, so how can we structure libraries of application like this? So here you can see that in applications, we have two applications. One is cart and one is products. So the application doesn't have a lot of code in it. It only has the route path, and it is referencing to one of the main pages, routable pages, which we have extracted out in a library. So this is how your app look like very, very plain, simple, not a lot of code here. And it also has the header. So yeah, that's the cart. For products, it's going to be the same. So here's the products, and in the HTML, you can see that we are just using the header here, and then the rest is router outlet. Now, let's see how we have categorized the libraries for it. So under libraries, we have one folder called cart, another folder as products, and then third one as shared. So under cart, we have a feature folder, and cart page is our feature library. How we came up with a conclusion that cart page can be a feature library. So if you see here, the code of cart page, so it is referencing data from the data access layer. So this is a smart component. This is using data, and it is also the routable component. It is using data access from the cart and from the product. It is also using one of the common UI, which is product price. So since this is a smart component and it's a routable component, it's the best suited example for to be a feature library. So that's why cart page goes into the feature library for cart. Now, for products, we have two features here. So as we saw that we have two routes of product application. One is the home page, and then another one was the product detail page. So here we are. So the first route is home page, and this is the code for it. And that's also a feature library. We have extracted that out as a feature library. It is also dependent on data access. We have used some of the UI and some of the utils as well in this library. So that's how we categorize the feature library. Now, what goes under the shared portion of it? So if you, when we open the shared folder, we will see that there are three types of libraries here. One is data access, UI, and util. So in data access, we have decided to put this data access under shared because the data for cart and product is being used by both the applications. So it's a shared data access layer, which can be used by both the apps. That's why it is inside the shared folder. If it was specific to each of the folders, then it will come here under cart and then data access layer, and then the code will go over there. But since it's a shared code, then that's why we have kept it inside the shared folder. So in shared folder, we have this data access layer. Here we have the state for the cart or the reducer selectors. We are using state management here. The similar thing is for products. We have the state here for products. We have the reducer selectors, effects, and actions, everything in here. And the other one is UI. So UI library, as we saw that the header component, it was being used in both the applications, products as well as cart. That's why header is a shared component, and it's a pure presentational component. It is not a smart component, and that's why we have kept it under the UI library. We can see here that it is not referencing any other libraries than util. So UI libraries can only depend on another UI library or a util library. So header is one of them, and then product price is a similar example. It is being used across both the applications. And you will see that here we are using utils. You can also refer another UI library in an UI library. Under utils library, we have stuff that is shared across different multiple applications. For example, we have a library for mock data. So here we have created some mock data, which is used in both the applications. Similarly, we have styles like global styles. It is here, which is used across the applications. We have types, which are the interfaces. So it's a product type. It is being used in product as well as cart applications. So this is how our util should look like. It should not be anything dependent on the application. It's like low-level code, just utility functions, pure functions. So apart from the folder structure, how can we define that what category of library is this? So for that, let's see an example of feature library, this cart page library. So under every library, we have this project JSON file. So if you open that project JSON file, you will see an option to set the tags here. So these tags are highly customizable, and we can set the values here. So since this is a feature library, we can set the type as feature here. And we can set the scope of this library as well. So for example, this is a cart page and it is only accessible by the cart application. So that's why we have set the scope as cart, and then the type will be feature here. Similarly, for a UI library, let's go and see the project JSON file. So here the tags are, the scope is shared because it's a shared library, and also the type is UI here. And we'll see an example for data access as well. So data access, this is project JSON. The tags are scope shared, type is data access. And the similar thing we can do for utils as well. So yeah, so here the type is util and scope is shared. This is highly customizable. You can add any kind of tags and any type of tags here and types here as well. But the recommended categorization of libraries are these. Now going back to the presentation. Yeah, here. 1 second. Yeah, so going back to the presentation. So the second point is that when breaking down the libraries, we should try to move all the routes to the feature libraries, as we have seen here in our cart and products example as well. That the front page of the products, we had a feature library for that. Even the details page, we had the feature library for that. So it's a good idea, and most important, categorization of libraries is the most important part of how to structure your NX monorepo. And this is how we can decide that what can go into the feature library. The third point is move the features shared between routes into new libraries. So as we saw in our example that, but in our examples, obviously under shared, we didn't have any features. But if there are any feature libraries which are shared across multiple applications, we can put it inside the shared folder as well. In our example, we saw that under shared folder, we had data access layer, utils and UI, because they were getting shared across cart and products libraries applications. So yeah, and Michael will tell us about how those custom tags work and how can we customize it and make more benefits from it.
Sorry, I had to find the mute button after I started sharing. Okay, so I'm going to get more into the tagging and custom tagging and how that all works together. So let's jump into that. As Saumya said, the tags are highly customizable, and really there's nothing that restrains them. Narwhal typically says, hey, feature, util, UI, data access. Those are a good place to start with your types. There are also cases where you might want to get more granular with this, like you might want to restrict this to maybe a team, or maybe something is still under development and you don't want people using it if it is. So you could do something like dev : true. And so now I've got this additional tag here. Let's see how these tags work. If I go look at the ESLint file, the tags tie into this linter that Narwhal provides, this enforce module boundaries. It has this option called depth constraints, and this is where we make all of the constraints. So things like the type and the scope, those are things that are a good idea, but NX doesn't enforce them at all. So you go set up your own rules for those things. And this is a partial rule set, so I can show you how this kind of works. So you see here, we have this type util. And what we're saying is, hey, if the tag is type util, then it can only depend on other libraries with the type of util. So that says, hey, util libraries only get to use util libraries. They don't get to use like UI libraries. Here's another one, type data access can use type util or type data access. And so like we could add another one that is like, that's UI. UI can use UI and data access. Feature can use any of the 4 types. So you can set up these rules. And then for scopes, like here's the cart scope. So we have an app called cart. We have a scope called cart. And we want to make sure that cart scoped things can only use other cart scoped things or shared scoped things. And then like we just added here, I added this dev true. Well, we might want to add another rule that says, hey, if we have a tag that says dev true, we really only want dev things that are still under development. Maybe you want to use, maybe you don't want it to be able to use other things under development, but maybe you want it to be able to use something else. But if you wanted, let me restate this. So this restriction will say what things dev true can use. If you wanted other things not to be able to use dev true, you could give other things a tag like dev false and say it can only depend on other things that are dev false. And that would make it so that if you have libraries that are not under development, some people use like experimental or things like that, then other libraries won't be able to use it. And that way you ensure like, hey, we do have code in here that's experimental or under development or whatever, and we don't want other people using it until it's ready. And this prevents people from doing that because the linter will catch that and not allow it. So it kind of insulates you from changes that you might not want. So the custom tags, very useful as you are transitioning code into libraries. The next thing to call out is buildable libraries. This is a flag you can set when you're creating a new library that gives the library a build target in your in the configuration. And what that means is when you go to serve or build the app, it actually builds the code in that library so that it doesn't have to be rebuilt all the time. So what this means is faster development, like dev server reloads. So the big power of NX is that it tracks, they call it a dependency graph. It tracks all the projects that are affected by any changes you've made. So let's say you have 200 libraries, you make a change to one library, and that library is used by 2 other libraries, and those libraries are used by a couple libraries. But what that boils down to is your change can potentially affect like 10 libraries in one app. And so with this dependency graph, it knows it doesn't have to like do anything with these other 200 libraries. It just needs to worry about these 10 libraries. And so if all your libraries have their own build targets, NX can say, hey, we don't have to rebuild all this other stuff because we know it's not affected by your change. Where without having the build targets, the builder will kind of just build everything or go and do those checks itself. But because you have the build target, it can depend on the NX like graph and reduce the checks needed when your page is reloading. And so it's a good way to help speed your development time. It also has added benefits for if you ever want to start deploying a library to say NPM, you need to have a build target on that. And buildable libraries can only depend on other buildable libraries. And so if you aren't setting buildable on things, and you're like, oh, we actually want to publish this library. Well, you've got to go then make sure that all of the libraries that it uses are also buildable before you can do that. So it's kind of, not only does it help you with speeding development times, but it also ensures that you aren't making more work for yourself in the future. So it's a very handy flag to use. Next, talk about the lint rules a little more. So this lint rule that Narwhal provides, it does 2 things. One is it allows you to set the constraints on your tags. That is extremely useful. This is what insulates you from circular dependencies and some other things. So this is very good to set up. The other thing that it does is it watches for circular dependencies. And so not only does it say, hey, if you try to import something from data access in a util library, you're going to get a lint error, but you're also going to get lint errors if NX sees that there's a circular dependency. So this could be a long chain too. Like you could have a library that depends on 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 the first library. And NX, this lint rule will detect that so that you don't run into problems with that. So really good. You want it set to error so that people know that it's a problem if they break that rule. Sometimes as you're like maturing a repo, you can't have it set to error on everything, but I would suggest if you can't do that, set it in the individual project's TS configs, like override it so that you still get the benefits on the new code, even if some older code that you're still trying to bring up to standard doesn't quite fit. And then one final trick for these breaking down into libraries is strict mode. Strict mode is very good. It saves you from a lot of errors a lot earlier. And it is the default in Angular now, but it hasn't always been the default. And what that means is that often if your project is older than a year, you're going to have code that is not strict. Now, it's difficult for people to just jump in and go make everything strict because that can be a headache. But you do want your new code to be strict. And just like buildable libraries, if you have a new library that is strict, it can't be depending on other libraries that are not strict. And so this can be a bit of an issue when you're trying to bring repo up to standard or mature it and things like that. But there is a bit of a workaround so that your code, your new code can still stay up to standard. And that is, if we look here, when you generate the library, you're going to have strict true. And sometimes that's fine to leave there, but when you go to build, and if you're not depending on just libraries with strict, you're going to get build errors because not everything is strict. The way to get around this is to just remove the strict from your project's TS config. So here we're in the cart page lids, cart page project. we're going to take strict mode out of here. And we are going to go to the tsconfig.lib.json, and we're going to add it in here. And what this does, you'll see we have 3 tsconfigs here. This tsconfig is the one that the tooling uses to build your project. This tsconfig is the tsconfig that's used by your editor when you're looking at the project. And so what this means is that your editor will enforce strict and make you do things as if strict mode was on. But then when it goes to build using this config, strict mode is not on, so you won't get those errors. And that way you're able to keep your code up to what you want it to be with strict mode without having to go and update all of your other code immediately. So that is very handy. Now, moving on to step 3. Step 3 is to take advantage of NX's monorepo tooling. So first thing to look at is NX DevTools. NX provides a really great plugin for VS Code called NX DevTools. And it's got several projects here, or several sections here. I'll collapse them so we can focus in on them. The first one is projects. Not everyone will use this, but if you have to deal with any sort of like configuration and things like that, this is a very easy way to be able to find what you're looking for. So in the past, it's like you had Angular JSON and that had every project's configuration. Now those configurations you can have in each of the projects, which is great, but still sometimes they can be a little big and hard to find what you want. But with the NX console, you can say, hey, I want to look at products and I need to look at the serve target for production. And if you click here, it will just open it to that part of the configuration so you can see what you want to see. And you can just choose whatever project you need to look at to do that. So that's very handy. This is what you will probably use the most, is this generate and run target. So this basically just runs your general like NX commands. So NX run, NX build, NX serve. The one I want to look at here is generate, because this is the one where you use your Angular schematics or generators. And we'll dig into this a little more in a minute, but you can also select any of these. So if I click products, it would do an ng or NX serve products. So if you ever forget what a command is, this is a good place to come. And then this is like NX specific commands. You can see all the affected commands. These are super important with NX, because that's kind of where all the power of NX comes, is being able to see the dependency graph and what projects are affected by your changes. And so that's what kind of these all do. And if you just click on one, it will let you add whatever arguments you need in here. But if I just click this, it's going to open the console and run that. And it's going to see that I've touched like 3 or 4 projects out of the 15 or 20 projects that are in here, and just with those. So that's a quick rundown of NX DevTools. There's also some, documentation stuff, links and such there. But yeah, this is a very handy thing to familiar yourself with. Next thing, workspace generators. So as you are maturing your project, standardization is going to get more and more important to you. And so show you this. If I go look at the library generator provided by Narwhal, so Narwhal Angular library, if we click on this, should have opened. You see there's a lot of arguments for generating a library. Well, chances are you have defaults that you want for these. Like maybe you never want Tailwind, you don't even need that option showing up. Maybe you always want Tailwind and you want it always checked. Just depends, but there's a lot of things in here that you could just have defaults that you want everyone to always use. And another good case for this is the tags. So this is like the scope and type tags that we were talking about earlier. it's a completely free-form text field because they're such a flexible thing. But as an organization, you might be like, oh, we don't want to make sure everyone has to type this exactly the right way every time. We want them to have options for this rather than just free-forming it. So this is a good candidate for making your own generator. So you can come in here, click generate, type generator. So here we go, narwhal workspace generator. So this will create a workspace generator. So you just click on that, give it a name, and run it. I have already done this for an example. So I can come over here and click, well, maybe I'll just go through this door. So tools, generators, live with defaults. So I just typed live with defaults here and ran it, and it generated me an index and a schema file. So if we look at this index, or we'll look at the schema file first. So this describes what you're going to see on this page. So what we're going to see a name, and I also wanted a scope and a type to define. And you give it a type, give it a description, tell it like where in the list you want it to show up. So this is what order it will show up in this list. And then I give it a prompt and tell it what things I want in the prompt. So we want cart, products, and shared for the scope. And we want feature, UI, util, data access for the type. And we made all of those required. And what this does is if we go back to our tools and say generate, and I say lib, you see down here, workspace generator. Workspace generators are the ones that we have made for our workspace. Lib with defaults, if I click that, it's gonna open here. We see we have this. So I can say testing, and we want the scope to be cart and the type to be util. And if I run this, it's gonna execute that, and it's going to generate that in the right place, cart util. It's going to be tagged with cart and util in the tags, and it's going to be in strict mode, and any other defaults that I want to set for that generator are set there. And you can see those settings here. So I had buildable true, strict true, simple module name. So set my defaults. This is a generator. It's pretty easy to set up, but then you have a very standardized way to do things in your repo. So that's a really great way to start utilizing the tooling that you have available to you. All right, and now I'm going to pass it off to Saumya to walk us through the dependency graph, and that's going to display for you kind of how NX works under the hood. Like, keep in mind, this is how all the affected commands know what they're doing. So take it away, Saumya.
Thank you, Michael. Yeah, so can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
So for dependency graph is a magic tool. So it is the primary way to visualize all the dependencies in our monorepo. So it gives us an idea and visualization of how the different libraries are dependent on each other, which is very, very insightful and very, very informative. So let's see how we can get a dependency graph. So the command for getting a dependency graph is npx nx affected graph. So let's pull that out. So when we enter that command, it will take you to the browser, and something like this will open up. So here you can see that we have different options here. So let's click on show all projects. So here it is. So these are all the libraries and applications which are present inside our project. And this is the display of the dependency in between them. So usually, like, when we click on cart, so this is an app, right? So it will tell you that what are the tags for this app is. So the type is app here, the scope is cart, and you can see that what all libraries it is dependent on. So by these arrows, you can figure out that this cart library is dependent on shared UI header, cart feature, cart page, shared utils assets, shared util styles. And this is very, very helpful. For example, let's see some of the util libraries. So you can see that this util library Some of the data access and other util libraries are dependent on this thing, this library. And we can also make sure that this is not dependent on any library that it is not supposed to be. So yeah, so and the similar thing for UI. So this is the pure UI library, and you can see that this is being consumed by these many features, and it is dependent on shared util library. Also, these arrows are very, very informative. So if I click on it, it tells us that what files we are referencing from the dependent library. So this dependent library is referencing this product price element.ts from the util library, which is very, very helpful. It's super handy. Here in this one, we are using three different files. We are referencing three different files, and that's how that library is dependent on the other one. I really like one of the features here, which is the group by folder. So it's more clear for me, and it makes me understand it better, because you can see the application in the folder structure that you have created for the application. So here we can see that we had a folder for cart, and we had a folder for products, and then another folder was shared. You can see the folders wise breakage of libraries here. So under cart, we have that cart feature, the same thing for products, and under shared, we have data access, UI, and utils, which is super handy. Another great usage of this dependency graph is that if I make a change, let's try to make a change, and then I'll show you how does it look like. So let's see if I go to my files and I make a change in this UI library, for instance, header. So here we are. And maybe in this file, I want to like one change. And now I will try to run the dependency graph again. So now here you see that there is another option, which is called show affected projects. So when you click on this option, this will give you an idea that what all projects are affected by the change that I just did. So it highlights and it picks out the list of libraries and applications which are dependent on the change that I just made. So since I made the change in the header UI, both of our apps, cart and products, they are consuming it, and also the E2E files of it. So that's why all of these files are affected, and then the NX will run all the tooling for all these affected libraries. You can also view show all projects, and even in the show all projects view, it will highlight the affected libraries which are being affected by your change, which is super helpful. And you can also see that there are no circular dependency, what all projects you need to are getting impacted with your change. If you're making a change to a common component or a shared library or anything, this is very, very helpful in visualization. So yeah, this is the overall feature of dependency graph, and this is how it helps us in visualizing our libraries and their dependency. And Michael will talk us and tell us about module federation. So over to you, Michael.
Okay, so module federation. I'm not going to show a code example for this. We're just going to look at a visual, because for this purpose, code example would not illustrate what we're looking at very well. But rundown module federation. Module federation, independently deployable features. It will load code at runtime. It's a lot like lazy loading, but it's like more extreme. It can be used by multiple apps, and you can deploy independently from consuming apps. So this is a big deal for, let's say you have a big project. You want to get to the point where you can do like continuous delivery, but that means you have a high standard for, hey, we need these types of automated tests and this type of coverage in order to be comfortable just deploying this without human intervention. Well, that can be a pretty big lift if it's a large project, and it's hard to get that done when you're still actively developing. But with module federation, if you have that set up, you can have this team is working on this feature, or maybe these routes, and this team's working on these other routes. And if team one is able to get appropriate testing in place for their feature, they can actually deploy independently of the app and the other features. And that means that they can actually be doing continuous delivery, even if the app as a whole is not. And so why this is a big deal is because before module federation, it's like, oh, continuous delivery, you have to have like everything to that standard in order to do it. But with module federation, you don't. If a team is able to have the time, or if it's a new feature and you're able to put in that focus from the start, like you can have that ready to go CD from the start, even if the app is not doing that. So that's a pretty powerful feature. So as a summary, as we mature our monorepo, there's kind of 3 steps. First, we need to set standards for new code so that we are following the standards that we want to be following in the monorepo and don't have to worry about all the stuff we have to update to get all of the code that just came into the monorepo. Just start with getting the new stuff in a good place. And then we can start breaking down the existing app into libraries. Start with your routes. Those are very easy to be like, oh, that's a chunk of code. This route can be moved to a feature library. And then identify the code that's used between those features, between those feature libraries, so that you can pull those out into libraries. And just doing those 2 things, your repo is going to be in pretty good shape and you'll be able to see benefits. And then the 3rd step is to start taking advantage of the tooling. So once you start getting more libraries and they're appropriately scoped, then your tooling can start really shining. And then you're getting to the point where instead of having, hey, I have a monorepo and you just have an app in it, you have like a mature monorepo that takes advantage of all the tooling that's available. Yeah. So, yeah, go ahead, Saumya.
So we have, for our examples, we have referenced this narwhal examples and NX examples in our code, and we have tweaked that and presented in front of you. But this is a very useful example. You can have a look at it. They have different types of libraries, and also it works for different languages. So you can have like React code, Angular code, workspace generators, everything in this example, which is very, very insightful. And it's a really good starter example to start the experience with NX and with Monorepo, which is really, really helpful. So here's the link to that. Also, we have listed out some of the commands. Like NX has so many commands. There are so many features that comes with NX tooling. But we have listed out a couple of commonly used commands, which will be everyone encounters, on a daily basis. So, like we have some of the commands like npx generate, which generates your libraries. Then we have an npx nx graph command. This is also the command to show the dependency graph. The most important and the one that I would like to highlight here is the npx nx affected commands. So these are the commands which can tell you that which are the affected areas of application of your monorepo that has been affected by the change that you just did. So you can run this command, and there's one which is like npx nx affected graph. The same that I use to show the different types of dependency graph, the different versions of different dependency graph, one with a change and one without a change. You can also set targets. So if your target is all, then it's going to bring it for the whole application. And you can also set the base and head as well. So if you want to see your changes and the affected libraries from one commit to another, you can do that using these commands. npx nx affected apps, as Michael already showed you. It will list out all the applications which have been affected by the changes that we have made. And the similar thing is for libraries, which is very, very important. And we can run tests lint on our affected libraries based on our changes, which is super, super helpful. So yeah, these are the commands that you can use. And here's the link to QR to our presentation. So if you're interested, you can get the presentation from here. I think you're on mute, Michael.
I am on mute. I was typing I have a clicky keyboard. All right, well, that's our presentation. I'm going to start going through the Q&A questions that have come up. So anyone that has a question, feel free to jump into the Q&A and put that in there, and we will start getting through those.
So, Michael, we have one question. I can read that out. So, first one is, do you ever see or recommend a shared library that is meant to be available across projects and a separate shared library that is only meant to be accessed from the different feature, but within a single project?
So this is a good question. So shared typically means that it's crossing scopes. So at its most basic, a scope is like an app. So like in our example, we had cart and what was it, product. And so shared would be something that's used across cart and product. And this one is asking project. So that's across projects, but different features. Well, if it's just features within a project, so cart, you have like 5 features under cart. Well, any of the UI libraries will be accessible by any of the features. So that's why we have the distinction of scope and type. So shared is the scope. So if it's only used by one app, it would have a scope of that app. If it's used by multiple apps, you'd use shared. And then the types aren't really, they're kind of separate constraints. And so the types, that's just like UI libraries can depend on UI and util libraries. And so shared isn't really used across features in a scope. Shared is just used to cross scopes.
Okay.
Hopefully that makes sense.
I agree. Yeah, the other one is, will the link of this recording be sent to everyone? I think Brian might be able to answer that. So I guess so.
Yeah, I believe it's being recorded. I'm not sure where that link will be shared.
Yeah,
but there, just to fill you in on that, what is going to happen in the next few weeks, this is going to be edited and then it will be up on YouTube. We will send a tweet out about it. So probably within the next 2.5 weeks, it will be up on YouTube and they can find it there.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Another question we have here is, can you recommend a deeper dive into enforce module boundaries?
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything around that really explains that well. I do know NX just redid their documentation, so it might say more about how to set up those like rules for your tags. Traditionally, there's not been much documentation about that. Yeah, it's one of those things that's important, but not a lot has been said about it.
Yeah, another one is, if you need to bump up a version for a set or a subset, depends on the tag of libraries with the same version like v1.2.3 and publish all of them to npm.js, what is the best utility?
I don't know of a utility specifically for that. In the past, like I've had just like a bash script that I'd run when I'm uploading libraries, but so it kind of depends on your monorepo setup and how you want that to operate, because it's like, oh, you made a change, it affected 5 libraries. Like my setups have typically been, hey, I don't actually need all of these versions to be in lockstep. So it's just, oh, these 5 libraries were affected by a change. They're all going to upload and they all get their next semantic version or whatever. So that's probably tooling that you'd have to set up yourself. There will be libraries that help you like pick the next version, if that makes sense, but you'll have to probably do something specific to make sure like, hey, these libraries I want to be in lockstep with each other. So that'd probably be a custom thing. there might be something out there. I've just not had to look or find it.
Mhm. Another question is, you mentioned versioning as a benefit of NX. How would you go about versioning? It's something that I'm struggling with implementing. So for versioning, it was more of, in a sense that, using a monorepo, all our apps and libraries reside in one repository. And that's why, NX, with NX, it gives us the benefit of using the same version of the applications and different libraries across the monorepo and across different applications in the monorepo. So for example, if I made a change to one library, and since it's a monorepo and with NX, it will tell us the affected libraries and applications which were depending on that library in which the change has been made, and it will automatically update the versions for all the libraries consuming it. So it will be directly updating using the latest version of the libraries that we have in our monorepo. So that's how it helps in versioning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's kind of like another side to versioning. And I'm not sure which one Connor's talking about. Like there's the versioning of your dependencies, which is kind of what you struck on, but there's also the versioning of the app. So I've worked places where they're like, hey, we want this version number put on the app. And that's a little aggravating because you kind of have to know what the end goal of that version is. So if the version number is there for convenience of development, for instance, like the commit hash, like that, people use that as a version for things sometimes, and that is for development. So like, oh, we found this bug, okay, it's on this commit. We know that because it's this version, and that version is like sent with like error logs to the backend or whatever. But if it's like a version that's like, oh, we want a human readable version on the app, yeah, so it's kind of, there's nuances to that. And that is another thing that's like, it's kind of a deploy time thing where there's nothing necessarily built into NX for that, other than that everything goes through the same build and deploy pipeline. So whatever, like if you have, I worked somewhere where we had like 10 plus apps deployed to production, and all of them had versions printed on them. But being able to be like, oh, we have the same strategy for putting the version on apps. So like, it doesn't matter which one of your apps you look at, you know what the strategy is, like that's beneficial by itself. But again, it's not something built into NX. It's a benefit you get because things are standardized with NX, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I guess we don't have any other open questions. So thank you everyone for joining our webinar. And it was a great pleasure presenting in front of you. You have been a great audience. And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.